As applied only to tax policy, those critics assert that we'll be increasing the deficit by using a current policy baseline, or we're using this baseline to hide the cost. Let me be very clear. We're not hiding the score that JCT or CBO would assign to the bill under a current law baseline. In fact, I like to see that score. It shows the amount of the tax increase that my colleagues on the other side are trying to push onto the American people. But let's be fully transparent. Both an estimate based on the current policy and one based on the current law will be released when we consider this bill on the Senate floor. And then Americans can see what kind of savings have been given to them by not raising their taxes. Under our current existing tax regime, the revenue to the GDP ratio this year will be about 17.1%, meaning we will raise taxes for the federal treasury under our current tax policy of about 17.1% of GDP on a current policy baseline. It will also be about the same next year if we don't let the taxes go up, meaning that the revenue will not appreciably change. Yet my colleagues on the other side say it's going to spike a hole in the deficit because, why? Because they won't get their hands on that $4 trillion of new tax revenue out of the American people. This would not increase debt relative to GDP. It would simply prevent a tax increase. And we need to be honest about what those tax increases would and would not do. Those who say we should let taxes go back up say, wow, then we could use it to pay down the national debt some more. Every tax increase that Congress has adopted for as long as I can remember was not used to pay down the national debt. It was used by Congress to spend more money. We've got to take that pressure off of spending as well. Congress does not have a revenue problem. It has a spending problem. Senate Republicans are united in our desire to take concrete steps to address our deficit and get our fiscal house in order. Because the bill we're debating today is within the confines of reconciliation, the scores and numbers that we'll be discussing don't reflect that full fiscal picture. In order to have an honest discussion of what needs to be done, there's an acknowledgement that needs to be made that other factors are also at play that can generate economic growth and reductions in spending. What am I talking about? Economic growth. As I indicated in one of the charts that we just had up, the estimates from the CEA are that if we make the tax policy permanent, the confidence that will give our economy and the boost that it will give our economy in proper tax incentive policy will grow the economy by as much as $4 trillion of new revenue to the federal treasury. The President is also directing impacts in the government through his efforts and the Department of Government Efficiency to aggressively cut waste, fraud, and abuse from our government programs. Spending on federal government programs has ballooned in recent years. We have a responsibility to evaluate these spending increases and ensure that these programs work effectively and efficiently for everyone. The President has also undertaken and will likely pursue more deregulation. Deregulation has had as big an impact on revenues and economic growth as tax policy has in the past, and we should recognize that. The bottom line is that in addition to the action that Congress can take, there are activities that the President is currently engaged in that will impact our fiscal policy by either reducing spending or increasing revenue, and we should also take those into consideration. Congress must begin the process of restoring fiscal sanity by achieving deficit reduction and spending reforms as the best way to achieve that goal. In contrast, imposing the largest tax increase in our country's history would be counterproductive by easing the gliding path and making it easier for more spending. We will have a very robust debate in the weeks ahead about the best way to deliver on President Trump's agenda, and I look forward to those discussions. The budget resolution unlocks the process for us to strengthen our national security, secure our borders, permanently extend the Trump tax cuts, and provide additional middle-class tax relief. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from California.
Mr. President, the Trump administration is corrupt. It is easily the single most corrupt and lawless administration in American history. And it would be exceedingly difficult to debate that simple proposition, because notwithstanding all of the whataboutism we occasionally hear, there is really no denying it. The self-dealing by unelected billionaires like Elon Musk, the presidential meme coins, the quid pro quos, the dismissal of corruption cases in exchange for help on the president's policy agenda, the dismissal of national security personnel, not on the basis of national security, but on the word of right-wing cranks, the deportation of someone to a maximum security prison in another country on the basis of a clerical error, the mass illegal firings, the reckless use of commercial apps for classified information, the scorning of court orders, the phony math to hide the deficit-exploding impact of tax cuts for billionaires, the attacks on Social Security, calling it a Ponzi scheme, when people are making the attacks, those that are making the attacks are the con men who want to raid the hard-earned retirement funds belonging to our nation's seniors and veterans. The swamp is full, it is overflowing, and Donald Trump is standing right in the middle of it, up to his ears in the filth. And it is plainly obvious to anyone who is watching that the president simply doesn't care about anyone but himself. Not you, not your families, certainly not the American people. He is in it for himself. While your retirement savings are being wiped out, he's playing the back nine at his country club. Oh, caddy, would you hand me a number 6? Now the Trump administration's abundant corruption doesn't happen in a vacuum. His corrupt self-dealing doesn't just boost his own bottom line and that of his wealthy donors. It hurts everyday Americans. It hurts Californians. It hurts all of us. So let me give you some examples. Days before Donald Trump was sworn in, he took one of the most obviously corrupt actions of his political career. And that's saying quite a lot. The president took to Twitter to announce that he was launching his own cryptocurrency, a meme coin. He would maintain a vast ownership of the stock in it, but anyone in the world could buy in, from a Chinese national under indictment in the US to any sultan in the Middle East looking to buy influence, and predictably the meme coin just skyrocketed. On paper, he appears to have made billions on it. It's possible he made more in one day from this joke cryptocurrency than he had made in his entire life up to that point. You might recall a press conference he had when a reporter asked him at the beginning of his presidency, are you going to continue to traffic in this coin and this currency that's making you a lot of money? And the president's question to him was, well, how much is it making me? And when the reporter said, well, it's making you a lot, the president was delighted. Turned to, presumably off camera, Elon Musk or one of the billionaires and said, well, that may not be much to these guys. And there was great laughter to be had. The corruption is out in the open. And the thing about this new currency is that it's a message to anyone who wants to curry favor with the president. Whether it's foreign governments or oligarchs or wealthy Wall Street billionaires, it gives them a chance to literally buy Donald Trump's favor, directly, corruptly, and unmistakably. Now, who does that ultimately hurt? The short answer is everyone else. So maybe a billionaire is buying a bigger tax break, but that means hardworking Americans are going to have to pay for it. Or maybe it's someone under indictment for fraud who can now get their case dismissed by Donald Trump's DOJ for the right price in meme coin. That hurts every American because it just invites all kinds of further corruption. Now the president's kids are in the crypto business, and there are even more opportunities for graft. In other parts of the world where there are long traditions of such corruption, They would be called princelings. There's a name for them. They're called princelings. Well, congratulations, America. We now have our own princelings, and they are called Eric and Don Jr. Now, as it turns out, it's not just by buying Trump meme coin or the kids' crypto investments that may help get the Justice Department to drop your case or get the Justice Department to go after your enemies. Since Donald Trump's first day in office, he has methodically and meticulously purged the Department of Justice of anyone who is not blindly loyal to him. Not loyal to the rule of law, mind you, not loyal to their oath, but loyal to the person of Donald Trump. That is and will be the only standard in this department. It is not a coincidence that the top 3 lawyers running the Justice Department, including Attorney General Pam Bondi, are all former Trump criminal defense lawyers. Their client was and always will be the multiply indicted and convicted felon who occupies the Oval Office. So how does this hurt everyday Americans? Well, it does so in a few ways. First, it means that the department's resources will be focused on all the wrong things. The DOJ should be focused on keeping Americans safe. It should be focused on cracking down on violent criminals and addressing the fentanyl crisis. It should be hunting down fraudsters who scam Americans. But instead, they're focused on retribution, on going after Trump's enemies, on helping those who were loyal to him, and wasting countless hours and resources in the process. But also, Trump is using the DOJ now to protect his friends and allies. You don't have to look any further than the case in New York. The mayor of New York, Eric Adams, indicted on serious corruption charges. A mayor who then, seeing the writing on the wall, pursues a kind of quid pro quo with the president. He goes down to Mar-a-Lago, and the quid pro quo eventually becomes as plain as day. It is out in the open. The president's own border czar does a joint interview sitting next to the mayor on Fox and Friends on their couch to lay out the stark quid pro quo in exquisite detail. All that was left unsaid by Trump's border czar were the words, "or else." The mayor would get his case dismissed, and in exchange, he would pursue the president's policy agenda when it comes to immigration. If the mayor was guilty of serious corruption, of bribery, of providing political favors to foreign nations in exchange for lavish gifts, and even the Trump DOJ doesn't deny the evidence against him, that just doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter, not if he is a political ally of the president. So who does that hurt? Well, it hurts New Yorkers. It invites more corruption in the city of New York. But this trend, of course, hurts everyone. A big corporation screwing over consumers can seemingly prevent investigation or prosecution now by kissing the ring. Just takes a trip to Mar-a-Lago. A corrupt politician can continue to leverage government resources for their own gain, knowing that they may never be held accountable for their actions. You can even storm this building, and they did. You can storm right into this chamber, and they did. You can trample American democracy. You can beat police officers in the name of this president, and not only will your prosecution be dropped, but you will be pardoned and celebrated. And beyond that, the public servants who prosecuted you will be removed, replaced, or demoted. They will be purged. By using the Justice Department as a shield to protect his friends and a sword to go after his enemies, it is the American people who will lose. Now, just down the street from the DOJ, at the Food and Drug Administration, there is something less talked about, but also quite sinister going on. Elon Musk and his many companies owns one, among his many companies, owns one called Neuralink. Now, this is a company that is aiming essentially to implant computers into people's brains. Now, while I am not personally one to want a Elon-sponsored device shoved into my cerebral cortex, I do believe in responsible innovation, and I even celebrate it. But unfortunately for responsible innovation, within weeks of entering office, Elon and Doge had fired essentially the entire team at the FDA's Office of Neurological and Physical Medicine Devices. You guessed it, the office in charge of reviewing his product. Gone. That sent a pretty clear message through the agency: get on board with Elon or you're out. It feels like par for the course for Elon, but it is really unprecedented in this country. Especially damaging is the fact that this also occurs at a time when they are just massively laying off people at the FDA. Huge cuts in the folks that make sure our medicine and food are safe. Not only does that mean life-saving medicine doesn't get reviewed and deployed faster to the American people, it means that dangerous stuff gets into circulation much longer before it can be stopped. Or maybe if it just gets to slip through with a wink and a nod and a big enough contribution to the Trump meme coin. And if you thought Elon stopped at the FDA, well, I have some more news for you. Doge has pulled the exact same move at other agencies, providing oversight over him or with which he has contracts. The FAA, where Elon Musk has desires for contracts for his Starlink satellite system. The Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, where Elon's companies face a significant threat of oversight, or at least they did before he made that agency largely go away. Or NASA, where Elon's SpaceX has billions in contracts. The Pentagon, more contracts for Elon. And now FDA. You can't find more corrupt self-dealing than that. Not in our history. You may be able to find it in other countries, but until this administration, you couldn't find it here. Now, in the category of good news, I guess if you're really wealthy, there is some good news for you at the IRS. And that is Donald Trump and his buddy Elon are gutting the IRS, tearing apart the agency that ensures that rich folks pay their fair share in taxes so they can't and don't scam the system. Well, by firing thousands of IRS employees, thousands of tax collections of rich folks will never occur, and billions of dollars that could be used to help our communities will never materialize. They're gutting it so that they can say it doesn't work, and then they can gut it even further, all to reward their billionaire friends. But it's worse than that. Much like the DOJ, it seems clear the Trump team has every intent of weaponizing the IRS to go after their enemies. They can order audits against people who speak out, protect those from audits who toe the line. Those attacks won't be just on big business, but also prominent political enemies. They could come for anyone who dares to speak out. A small business that sells a product they don't like, a nonprofit that supports a cause they don't like, they get an audit. But the president's wealthy buddies, no, they do really well. But this gutting of the IRS, this tax giveaway to people by gutting the IRS, this isn't the biggest con. This isn't the biggest con, not by a long shot. Because the biggest con involves trillions of dollars. And that, of course, is the tax cut. How they pay for it and how they don't. Donald Trump, who solicited untold sums from billionaires in the form of campaign contributions and shady schemes to enrich himself, delivers in a way that those donors could hardly imagine. Massive tax cuts for the wealthiest among us, paid for by cutting Medicaid and other vital services, and by borrowing a ton of money from your kids and grandkids, sinking the nation further into debt. Tax cuts for billionaires and more. Well, if you're one of them, that's great news. That means time to buy another yacht, or maybe another vacation home, more money to invest in the stock market, and they may need to, given what the Trump tariffs are doing in the market right now. But that's what their contributions bought them, a few billion here and a few billion there. And pretty soon we're talking about serious money for these wealthy donors and large corporations. But the thing is, these tax cuts aren't free. Yeah, they're using this phony math they call the current policy baseline. It's a phony math that says if you spent $3,000 on a vacation last year, you can spend another $3,000 this year and it won't cost anything because it's the current baseline in your family. But the reality is, these tax cuts aren't free. Somebody's going to pay for them. Well, it won't be the real wealthy that pay for them. Everyone else is going to pay for them. Working Americans are going to see their costs skyrocket. They're going to see their retirement accounts plummet, and their Social Security and Medicaid ripped apart to give more money to billionaires. And here's the thing, they don't even pretend anymore. They are happy to admit that their multi-trillion-dollar check that they're about to write to billionaires will be paid for by everyone else. Not just in dollars, but in the programs you rely on, programs you paid into your whole life. Medicaid on the chopping block, Social Security, offices closing, phone lines unanswered. They want it to slowly die on the vine. Food assistance going the way of the dodo bird, and the list goes on and on and on. Life will get harder and harder. That is, of course, unless you're a multi-billionaire who wrote a big check to Donald Trump, which, if he doesn't bring about a global recession, just might turn out to be a pretty damn good investment. During his campaign, Donald Trump promised his wealthy donors that he'd make them even richer by cutting their taxes. He invited many of them to his inauguration. Some even got to stand on the stage with them as he was sworn in. This is who Donald Trump is for. He is for them. He is for the really, really rich. That is whom he represents. We are for you. I yield back.
Madam President.
Senator from Vermont.
Thank you. Madam President, let me say a few words about where we are as a nation, what this budget resolution does, and why I am strongly opposed to it. Madam President, as you may know, we have more income and wealth inequality in our country today than we have ever had in the history of America. 3 people on top own more wealth than the bottom half of American society. Top 1% owns more wealth than the bottom 90%. CEOs now make about 300 times more than their workers. In other words, the very rich becoming much richer, and working families are struggling. So what does this budget resolution do to address this very serious crisis? Does it help working people? Does it help low-income people? No, not really. It actually makes income and wealth inequality much worse by providing massive tax breaks to the billionaires and the richest people in this country, driving up the national debt, and making those on top very, very happy. Madam President, in America today, the richest country in the history of the world, we have 60% of our people living paycheck to paycheck, struggling every week to put food on the table, to pay the rent, to deal with child care, to take care with health care. Madam President, real wages, real inflation accounted for wages for the average American worker have been stagnant for the last 50 years, despite a huge increase in worker productivity. And today, all across this country, you have workers working for 11, 12, 13 bucks an hour, working for starvation wages. Some of them are actually sleeping in their cars. Now, how does this budget resolution address the crises facing working families? Well, at a time when many workers are struggling to find affordable housing, what this budget will do is cut back on housing programs, making it harder for working people to get decent housing. It will cut funding for low-income and affordable housing. So it makes life more difficult for millions of working families. Madam President, at a time when 22% of our seniors are trying to survive on less than $15,000 a year, and that's really quite shocking. It's something we don't talk about, something that we don't deal with here in Congress. Can you imagine a senior citizen trying to survive on $15,000 a year, when seniors need additional health care, when seniors need to keep their homes warmer? They have all kinds of issues trying to get by on $15,000 a year. 22% of seniors are in that position. Half of seniors are trying to get by on $30,000 a year or less. So how does this legislation, this budget, help seniors? What does it do for seniors? Well, it makes it a bad situation much worse. This legislation, this budget, will make it much harder for seniors to receive the care they desperately need in nursing homes. In Vermont, and I expect in most states in this country, we have a major nursing home crisis. Nursing homes are shutting down. Harder and harder for people to get into nursing homes. Well, when you cut Medicaid by $880 billion, you're going to make it much, much harder for seniors to access nursing homes, because 2 out of 3 seniors are dependent upon Medicaid to get into nursing homes. This legislation would also cut back on nutrition programs for seniors at a time when many seniors are having a hard time affording the food that they need. And maybe worst of all, at a moment when Mr. Musk and his billionaire friends are laying off thousands of workers at the Social Security Administration, closing down Social Security offices all over the country, making it harder for people with disabilities and older people to get the benefits that they have paid into for their whole lives. This bill does nothing to address that crisis. Madam President, we right now, embarrassingly, have the highest rate of childhood poverty of almost any major country on earth. A little bit embarrassing. We're the richest country on the face of the earth. We have more income and wealth inequality than any other country. We're seeing a significant growth in the number of billionaires we have, but in terms of our kids, we have the highest rate of childhood poverty of almost any major nation. Now, how would this budget impact our children? Well, it would make a bad situation even worse by throwing millions of kids off the health care that they have. That's what happens when you cut Medicaid by hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars. This budget would cut nutrition programs that 1 out of every 5 children depend upon. Amazingly, sadly, in America, a lot of kids go to school hungry, and this legislation would cut nutrition programs. Furthermore, for working families, this legislation would do nothing to address the outrageously high cost of child care in America. And, by the way, it would make devastating cuts to education, I think significantly in working-class communities. Madam President, it is no secret to anybody that our current health care system is far and away the most expensive in the world. We spend about twice as much per capita on health care as almost any other nation. Most Americans understand and deal with the reality every day that our health care system is dysfunctional. It takes forever to get a deal with the insurance companies and get your claims processed. It is extremely cruel. A significant number of people who are struggling with cancer end up going bankrupt because they cannot afford the outrageous cost of the hospital care that they have received. So what does this budget do to address our broken and dysfunctional healthcare system? Well, hard to believe, but it makes a terrible situation even worse. By cutting Medicaid up to $880 billion, this legislation could force as many as 36 million Americans off the health care that they currently have. Now, right now, we've got 85 million Americans who are uninsured or underinsured. That number would soar. So you're going to have low-income working people, don't have a lot of money. What happens when they get sick? We lose 60,000 people a year right now, despite Medicaid, who don't go to a doctor when they should because they can't afford to. This budget would make that situation much, much worse. And at a time when we have a massive crisis in primary health care, not enough doctors, not enough nurses, not enough mental health counselors, not enough primary care facilities where people can get into a doctor when they need, by cutting Medicaid, this legislation would make access to community health centers, something that I've worked on for a very long time, make it harder for people to access community health centers because community health centers are highly dependent on Medicaid for their funding. Madam President, virtually every scientist who has studied the issue has made it clear that climate change is an existential threat to our planet. And I understand that the current President of the United States thinks that it is a hoax originating in China, but that is not what 99.5% of the scientists who study the issue believe. And as we look around and see year after year becoming warmer, the last 10 years, warmest on record, when we see the terrible flooding and drought and extreme weather disturbances taking place in our country and all over the world, the American people understand that climate change is all too real and is having devastating impacts on our lives. So, what does this legislation do to address the extraordinary crisis that we face in terms of climate change? Well, hard to believe, but it makes a bad situation even worse by opening up vast swaths of public land to big oil companies so they can drill, baby, drill. And it opens up public lands to more and more oil companies. Brilliant. We face an existential threat, and this legislation makes that threat even worse. Well, it seems to me, Madam President, that instead of passing this absurd budget proposal, we should move in exactly the opposite direction that this proposal takes us. Instead of making life more difficult for the working class of our country, instead of rewarding the billionaire campaign contributors who fund many, many campaigns around here, maybe, just maybe, we should represent the needs of our constituents, the working families of this country. And one of the ways that we could do it is by raising the minimum wage to a living wage. I know that is around here a very radical idea. Imagine that. We raise the minimum wage, which is today at the federal level $7.25 an hour. So we're going to be offering an amendment to raise the minimum wage to a living wage, $17 an hour. And maybe instead of making it harder for working families to find affordable housing, maybe, just maybe, we should build millions of units of low-income affordable housing. Maybe, just maybe, instead of making it harder for families to access child care, we should make it easier and more affordable. And maybe instead of cutting Medicaid by $880 billion, maybe instead of doing that, we should do what virtually every other major nation on earth does, and that is understand that health care is a human right, that every man, woman, and child is entitled to health care as a human being. And we can do that by passing a Medicare for All single-payer program. The function of a health care system should not be to make the insurance companies and the drug companies much wealthier. It should be to provide quality health care in a cost-effective way to all of our people. So there you go. What we have is a budget proposal in front of us which makes bad situations much worse and does virtually nothing to protect the needs of working families. But what it does do, of course, is reward wealthy campaign contributors by providing over $1 trillion in tax breaks to the top 1%. You know, I'm going to vote against this proposal, that's for sure. And I wish my Republican friends the best of luck when they go home, if they dare to hold town meetings and explain to their constituents why they think at a time of massive income and wealth inequality, it's a great idea to give tax breaks to billionaires and cut Medicaid and education and other programs that working families desperately need. I do wish them the very best of luck as they go forward in that way. Madam President, with that, I would yield the floor.
President.
Senator from Louisiana.
Madam President, our country has had some pretty severe economic challenges of late. I'm not talking about the recent stock market losses, although those are quite important for someone with a 401k. I'm talking about how real Americans, average Americans, feel as if the American dream of home ownership, of buying a new car or truck, buying their child a car, affording a student loan, is just slipping out of their grasp. We saw this fear during the Biden administration when inflation was so high, the Federal Reserve increased interest rates, and as these interest rates rose, so did consumer interest rates on all sorts of things, directly impacting the ability of a family to realize the American dream. This speech is about how do we preserve that ability of Americans to achieve that dream, and how what we are doing today, tonight, in this Congress directly impacts that. Now, it may seem pretty distant to someone watching from home, but it does directly impact that. How much money the federal government borrows, how much this budget resolution leads to increased indebtedness, that sounds abstract, but it impacts your ability to buy that home, to buy that car, to attend that school. And some of the process discussions that normally wouldn't work, how does Congress do this, how does it do that, if you're not in Congress, they're actually extremely important to this discussion of how much we are going to borrow and how much we are going to enable Americans in Louisiana, the state I'm privileged to represent, and elsewhere, achieve their dream. Let me explain. As our country borrows more money, so we pass something and our debt explodes, and as our country has to borrow money to pay for that debt, it begins to compete with businesses, with individuals, with families, as they also go out and try and borrow money. Now, the federal government's always going to get the first amount, and it is going to be the others who have to pay more to compete. And paying more means you pay more for your mortgage, You pay more for your car note, you pay more for your student loan interest rate. The only way to keep this from happening is for the federal government to live within its means. I think the inflation of the last 4 years is one of the principal reasons the American people tossed Joe Biden out and they put Donald Trump back into the White House. The Biden administration did not live within its means, borrowed a lot of money, drove up interest rates. The American people couldn't afford that which they expected to be able to buy. They voted for change. Now, President Trump understands this. When he spoke to Congress last month, spoke of renewal of the American dream. And in that speech about renewing the American dream, he spoke about having a balanced budget. He understands, he desires, he sees the connection between living within our means and making it good for fellow Americans. And by the way, I agree with him. I agree that balancing the federal budget is key to preserving that dream. So why is this important now? Our country, right now, not tomorrow, right now, is $36 trillion in debt. 36 trillion with a T. And if we do nothing, if all we do is status quo, continue on the path we're on, it is estimated we will add $21 trillion to that indebtedness over the next 10 years. Now, what about today? We're going to vote on a budget resolution tonight. If we vote on that budget resolution and it leads to a reconciliation bill which is not paid for, we will add another $5 to $11 trillion. On top of that, 36 trillion plus 21 trillion, we could end up with 65 to almost $70 trillion of indebtedness 10 years from now if we don't do that right. I'm a doctor. I'm going to borrow a term from medicine. I'm going to adapt it, if you will. That would be congressional malpractice. We do not want to be guilty of congressional malpractice. Now, at some point, the problem begins to build upon itself. Currently, a fifth of tax revenue is used to pay interest on the debt. 20% of all the money the federal government gets is right now being used to pay interest on the debt. That is more than we spend on national defense. I'm going to repeat that one. Right now, we're paying more, paying back people who lent us money, than we're paying to protect our country and to pay the troops who are doing so. There's a historian, Niall Ferguson, who says that when a country is spending more on debt service than on defending itself, that is the mark of a country in decline. Current Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent made a similar point in a Fox News op-ed. He wrote that, quote, America's next security crisis is lurking in our pocketbooks, that our escalating debt crisis hurts national security in three key ways. It diminishes our financial surge capacity. It robs our private sector of capital for productive investment, and it imperils America's preeminent role in international financial markets. Well, Scott Bessent is now Secretary Bessent, and he is right. The debt is a threat to our national security and to the economic security of the American family. By the way, families know this. You might be in Caddo Parish, Louisiana, you might be in Covington, Louisiana, but they've learned to live within their means, and we should learn something from those Louisiana families. So let's discuss the budget resolution before us. Now, to be sure, this resolution only sets up a discussion of a reconciliation bill. And the reconciliation bill is where we actually establish how much is spent and where it should be spent. Nevertheless, this budget resolution points in a direction and establishes certain parameters. Now, at this point, I'm going to discuss a little bit about process. And there's been a lot of debate in Washington about using current policy versus current law as baseline in this budget resolution. Now, current policy has never been used as baseline involving this much money and in a reconciliation bill. And I'm going to show a chart here. In this chart, this is the years over here. This is 2025 going all the way out to 2055. And this is how much our debt is as a percent of our tax revenue. And you can see that if this is what the Congressional Budget Office says is our current trajectory, that in 2055 we'll have a debt to GDP ratio of about 156%, that under what we're looking at could increase that to 211 to 230%. So this is the trajectory on, which is not great. But if all we do is what we're doing today without any effort to offset it, we would increase this 210 to 230%. Now somewhere around 174%, the economists say we're in trouble. To borrow a gastroenterological term, I'm a gastroenterologist, we're in deep doo-doo. And in that is what we have to worry about. Now, I've discussed this extensively with my Senate colleagues. I'm pleased to say there is a commitment from President Trump and the White House to work with senators to go through the budget line by line to see where there can be savings. The White House and Congress have committed to working together to decrease the regulatory hassle that keeps a business from starting a new venture, to create more jobs, to hire more people, to give them better salaries. Let's cut that red tape and allow those businesses and those workers to achieve their potential. And doing so increases revenue. When people are making more money, they pay more taxes. Clearly, the president's working hard now to make the government work more efficiently, again, which saves us money. I have been assured that there is a commitment in other ways to pay for the eventual reconciliation bill. Now, I am not saying that I think that it is better that we use current policy as baseline. It's never been done before in a setting like this. I think it establishes a dangerous precedent. It might be within the rules to do so, but it doesn't mean it's wise to do so. And as a conservative, I know sometimes that even if you can open Pandora's box, it's better not to. Put differently, just because you can doesn't mean you should. But it appears we're going to do that. Also, using current policy as baseline should not suggest to us that the current tax code is perfect. I would say far from it. According to publicly available information, Jeff Bezos, the second richest man in the world, got a child tax credit several years ago. Now, tax credits for children are supposed to go to middle-income and lower-income families, not to the second richest man in the world. I hope as we go through this, we can modify that. Let the dollars go where they're needed, not to someone who is obviously wealthier than any of us put together. All that said, this vote's not taking place in a vacuum. It's taking place when the stock market has had 2 successive days of greater than 1,500 points decline. This kind of crashing stock market creates uncertainty, which makes companies less likely to invest, which makes it less likely that new jobs will be created. And creating new, good-paying jobs is essential to that individual, that family, enjoying the American dream. Upon consideration, and given the commitment from leadership, I would say that not passing this budget resolution could increase the uncertainty in the economy, and that is something I do not wish to do. And given the commitment from leadership to pay for this bill by a variety of mechanisms, whether it is from within the reconciliation vehicle or outside of that process, and once more, the need to reestablish confidence among those creating jobs, I will vote for this budget resolution. And as we move on from this budget resolution to the reconciliation bill, I will look to make sure that we are truly paying for it and addressing the national debt. And to that end, let me kind of mention something as an aside. No, not as an aside, as directly impacting this conversation. I encourage the use of America's abundance as a way to increase the possibility of Americans achieving the American dream, and as a way to also help pay for the government we now have. One example, I applaud President Trump for advocating greater exploration of oil and gas on federal lands. This creates great paying jobs. It is a tax base for communities, and it generates significant revenue for the federal government. Not by raising taxes, and it doesn't cut benefits, but by exploiting, if you will, in a positive way, the resources we have to produce that which is essential to living a modern life. I have also proposed in other settings other solutions that can address our nation's indebtedness without raising taxes or cutting benefits. Again, I've spoken to these in the past. I will speak to them in the future. I want America to be great for all Americans, that we can all live to the limits of our God-given gifts. Creating opportunity is part of this. My hope, my expectation, is that through this process we are currently in, we will create more opportunity for every American to express his or her God-given gifts and to achieve the American dream. With that, I yield.
Madam President.
Senator from Massachusetts.
Madam President, are we in a quorum?
We are not.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, Social Security is under attack. Donald Trump, Elon Musk, and Doge are revving up their chainsaw and coming after America's earned Social Security benefits. They are cutting staff, slashing services, closing offices, and lying about the program. 10 days from now, the Doge chainsaw is threatening to cut phone services at the Social Security Administration. Cutting the phone services at the Social Security Administration. jeopardizing benefits that seniors earned through a lifetime of work. In 2023, do you know how many people died waiting for their Social Security benefits? 30,000. 30,000 Americans. What do we think now about doing away with 1-800 phone service, and what will that do to wait times that are already too long? Yesterday, I just decided to get on and to dial 1-800 and just see how long it would take for a United States senator to be able to connect with the Social Security Administration. It was a half hour, it was an hour, and then they just said, there's at least a 2-hour wait. Well, for Grandma and Grandpa, we just don't want them waiting a couple of hours or more in order to get the information they need about, for most of them or a lot of them, the only check in their life, the only thing that keeps them with the capacity to be able to pay for the groceries, the rent, or even for the phone service. But at the Social Security Administration, over the last 8 weeks, it's now 1-800, dial the number, and then just wait. So the administration is then forcing people to, instead of being able to use the phone, they're saying, get online, Grandma. And then Grandma is saying, oh, you know what? I forgot to take that computer course 30 years ago, and I'm 88 now. But they're saying, you got to learn how to go online, Grandma. Or else no Social Security benefits because we're cutting off the phone service. Or drive. Just get out there in the car. And some of the Social Security offices are a couple hundred miles away from people. But that's the plan. We're 10 days away from that being put into place. And that's even if the field office is still open for Social Security, because they're planning on cutting the field offices as well, just for people to be able to access their earned benefits. And why is this happening? Well, because of the lie that Social Security is rife with fraud. That is a lie just like claims of fraud made by President Trump when he said someone was listed in the Social Security system at age 360. So let me say that again. He claimed someone was 360 years old, older not just than the entire Social Security program, but older than the United States of America, because that person would have had to have been born in 1659. But yet Trump and Musk are lying in order to undermine, in order to discredit the entire Social Security infrastructure in our country. Now, a federal judge called DOJ's fraud-finding mission at the Social Security Administration, quote, and they called it a fishing expedition, based on little more than suspicion with no evidence at all that had been presented by the Trump administration that there was massive fraud inside the Social Security Administration. And we heard him at the State of the Union address as he's up there talking about people 200 years old, 300 years old, and it turns out that none of it was true. Trump was using the State of the Union address just to lie to the American people about Social Security. Now, why would he do that? Why would he lie to seniors in our country? Why would he lie to people with disabilities? Because, very simply, the Republican Party from 1935 on opposed the Social Security system from being put into place in the first place. They harbor an ancient animosity towards Social Security. They actually didn't support putting Medicare on the books. They harbor an ancient animosity towards all of these programs. And now they feel that their time has come to undermine, to discredit. And instead of giving Americans a level playing field, the administration is hurling curveballs at Grandma, curveballs at Grandpa, and we're already seeing the effects on Social Security benefits. Recently, a young woman contacted my office because her disability case, which had already been delayed by previous Social Security cuts, is now halted. Halted. woman with disabilities. This woman was homeless, had a young child to care for while she struggled to afford a place to live without benefits. And my office is contacted on a daily basis by people just like that, by senior citizens who are terrified that they will lose the earned benefits they rely on to eat and to keep a roof over their heads. So instead of helping millions of Americans navigate life's transitions, this administration is implementing a roadmap to ruin for the Social Security Administration. And what's that roadmap? Very simple. First, lie about fraud in the program with no evidence to undermine the public confidence in the Social Security system. Second, use those lies as an excuse to hollow out Social Security and to cut benefits. And third, raise the retirement age and privatize Social Security, handing your benefits over to Wall Street, making the billionaires richer and our seniors poorer. Can you imagine if the Republican playbook had been put in place during the George W. Bush administration, which was to put all of this money out into the market? There would be seniors all across our nation having a Pepto-Bismol moment in the marketplace, wondering what was happening to their life savings. So that was the program that they tried to put in place during the George W. Bush's administration. It still is the plan, but we should not, in fact, fall for that, because we can't trust the markets to guarantee the returns which seniors are going to need in order to have a predictable and safe retirement. Social Security isn't a budget line, it's a lifeline. And for too many of the people who are advocating for privatization, GOP really stands for get old people. That's the plan. If you kick them in the heart, you're going to break your toe. It's a lifeline. In Massachusetts, 1 in 5 people in Massachusetts rely upon Social Security benefits to put food on their table, to buy groceries, and to pay their bills. Here's an astounding number. 22 million Americans are dependent upon Social Security to the extent to which they would be thrown into poverty if they just missed 1 month's check. And that includes about 16 million seniors, 268,000 of whom live in my home state of Massachusetts. If you need a reminder why our seniors should never rely on Wall Street for a secure retirement, take a look at the stock market this week. Trump called Wednesday Liberation Day, but it should really be called Obliteration Day. We've seen the stock market absolutely obliterated over the past 2 days, thanks to Donald Trump. Today, the Dow dropped 2,200 points. It was the worst day for the market since 2020, and now the market has lost more than 10% of its total value over the past 2 days. Grandma and Grandpa should not be trusting the casino of Wall Street for their retirement benefits. That's why we set up the Social Security system in 1935. Donald Trump has instituted a reckless trade war, and seniors are seeing their 401ks and retirements evaporate on top of his efforts to slash their health care and Social Security benefits. The only thing the Trump administration and Senate Republicans are offering our seniors is social insecurity. Mr. President, Madam President, Social Security isn't rife with fraud. It's not a Ponzi scheme, as Elon Musk called it. It isn't something that can just be turned off. Social Security is a promise we made to current and future generations who would be absolutely broke if we did not fulfill our promises to them. Republicans and DOJ are taking a sledgehammer to the benefits that are a lifeline, a true lifeline for people with disabilities, and that seniors have worked hard their whole lives in order to earn. Social Security is not an entitlement, it is an earned benefit. And Republicans haven't been able to destroy Social Security yet. There's a reason why it's called the third rail of American politics, and we're not going to allow Musk and Trump or their billionaire buddies to succeed in destroying Social Security with their lies and their cuts and their cruelty. We will not neglect the promise we made, and we will preserve security and dignified retirement for everyone. The loudest voices in this fight are those of countless Americans who simply want the government to honor its promise to retirees, to seniors, and to people with disabilities. This is not an administration that works for the American people. Trump's not going to take from the American people all at once. He's going to do it inch by inch at a time, and Trump and his billionaire enablers will inch by inch steal from the workers to give tax breaks to the rich, steal from seniors to give tax breaks to the rich, steal from children to give tax breaks to the rich, steal from those who are sick to give tax breaks for the rich, to loot all the programs that have been put on the books in order to ensure that our society is so much better than it was in 1935. And I'll tell you this, in 1900, the average age of death, life expectancy, was 48 years of age. We had gone from the Garden of Eden to 1900, life expectancy was 48 years of age. In 1900, 20% of all children died before the age of 5. And then the progressive movement put programs on the books, Social Security, vaccines, Medicare, Medicaid, Head Start, in order to make sure that everyone was able to enjoy the full benefits of our society. That is what this ancient animosity of people like Donald Trump want to rid the society of. So I just want to say Democrats will always be here, always fighting against these callous cuts and heartless efforts by Trump and Musk and the Senate Republicans. And we're going to do it on vote after vote all night and into the morning in order to make sure that the American people understand who is on their side. So with that, Madam President, I yield back.
Madam President,
Senator from California.
this week Donald Trump spent his time doing three things: golfing in Mar-a-Lago, announcing his latest set of tariffs that will cost families $3,800 more a year and that are so chaotic and far-reaching that they included retaliatory tariffs on a remote island inhabited only by penguins. I kid you not. And third, advocating for cuts that would destroy the services and benefits millions rely on for their health care and retirement savings. Today, with the stock market in the tank and the nation's economy in free fall, we're expected to vote on this failed businessman's latest brilliant financial plan for the nation. So let's talk about his budget. At its very core, this bill will give massive tax cuts to billionaires and make middle-class families pay for it. Tax cuts that billionaires simply don't need. And only the billionaires and Republicans in D.C. apparently support this. But wait, the bill that will pass in the dead of night accomplishes other partisan fantasies as well. It takes away health care and goes after the heart of Social Security. It is the same old playbook. Billionaires win and families lose. And lest we forget, it's the exact same playbook that they ran in 2017. So how exactly is this a win for billionaires? 2/3 of all of the benefits in this bill go to the super wealthy and corporations. 2/3. Over the next 30 years, this bill would spend $25 trillion, that's trillion with a T, on tax cuts for the wealthy and big corporations. It would add $37 trillion to the debt. $37 trillion. That will double the nation's debt. Double it. It will also, by the way, hand tens of millions of dollars to Elon Musk just in the next few years. So he makes out like a bandit. But if you're a family earning, I don't know, $30,000 a year, struggling to get by, or maybe $50,000 or $75,000 a year, you'll be lucky to see any tax relief from this plan. But if you're in the top 0.1%, you'll get an extra $300,000 a year at the very least. For every dollar that would go to people waiting tables or teaching at a preschool, someone in the top 0.1% would get over $52,000. That's $52,000 for every dollar that someone waiting tables or teaching at a preschool will get. To pass this bill will mean that the top 5% of earners will get nearly half of all the tax benefits. That is just not right, not fair, not wise, not sound, not sustainable. Life is already too hard for working families without taking more from them to make the rich even richer. So how is this bill a loser for families? It's a loser because it would raise costs by more than $1,000 on low-income Americans across the board, from health care to groceries to housing. Families who are already hurting and are going to be hurting more big time because of Donald Trump's massive tariff tax. Tariffs that are raising the costs of everything they buy, from coffee to the eggs they have for breakfast, to the clothes they dress their kids in before school, to the gas they use to drive to work, to the materials their small businesses import, to the meals that they have when they arrive at home or the sandwich they grab in between jobs. These families are getting punched right in the gut. And Donald Trump knows it, and knows that this budget would amplify their pain. Because beyond exploding costs for working Americans, it will also decimate Medicaid, threatening health care for nearly 80 million Americans. That's 2 in 3 nursing home residents, 2 in 5 children, and 1 in 3 Americans in rural communities. But even if someone isn't on Medicaid, they'll still feel the cost, they'll still feel the pain. Medicaid is the largest insurer in the nation, so when it goes down, so will the care that so many families rely on. Now, whether you're on Medicaid or you are not, it is your local hospital that may close. Clinics will close, doctors will have to move or shutter their practices. Care that used to be maybe one town away will now be an entire county away, and a very long drive, especially for Americans in rural areas who already cannot afford the cost of living. This bill would be the equivalent of an atomic bomb on the care and the caregivers they rely upon. Caregivers like Sabrina Bishop, a California home care provider. She serves 3 clients around San Diego. 2 are disabled veterans. 1 receives care through California's in-home support services, all of which is funded through California's Medicaid provider, Medi-Cal. Bathing them, medication management, cleaning, laundry, food preparation. She does it all. She lives with her client, Mike. He is at the end stage of dementia and unable to communicate. He can't dial 911. If he sees any medication bottles, he'll just take them. If he sees a car door open, he might just get in it no matter whose car it is. Here's what she told me. My work means that he has someone to help him, that he can safely live and with dignity in his twilight years. Many of the folks who rely on funding from Medicaid don't have a family who can help with around-the-clock care. And without the services that she provides, which are funded by Medicaid, those people won't get their medications on time or be bathed or fed. We are talking about a person's most basic needs. If funding were to get cut more, Sabrina says she thinks many caregivers will just decide they can't afford to do the work they love anymore. There's already a major shortage of care providers. Thousands of people who need care are stuck on waiting lists. And Republicans in this bill want to make things so much worse, so much worse. Seniors and disabled individuals will be trapped in their homes without anyone to look after them or be institutionalized at greater cost, if indeed they can even find a skilled nursing facility that is still open. When asked what she wants members of Congress to understand about her situation, Sabrina said, "Don't be so quick to cut funding for Medicaid. You yourself may end up needing a caregiver. You may be diagnosed with a terminal disease at your next doctor's appointment. You may have a car accident and can no longer take care of yourself." But without Sabrina and the countless others who do the life-saving work that she does, there may be no one to call. That's what we're talking about here. And yet that's what this administration and this Congress seems intent on doing, to deny this care, to give Elon Musk, Donald Trump, and all of their billionaire friends even more money. And that is a disgrace. What about Social Security? On that one, DOGE is starting the dirty work already. We're already seeing the cuts and the clawbacks. Elon and his bros heading into Social Security Administration and firing the staff that make sure you get your check on time. They have plans to close 26 Social Security offices this year alone. They're cutting phone services and pointing seniors to online options that are often unreliable and inaccessible, and if we're being honest, something that not all seniors are able to do. But this is their plan. They're taking a program focused on helping seniors and then turning around and removing all the tools seniors use to get the help that they need. And they're not hiding it. They're celebrating it. Donald Trump's co-president, Elon Musk, went on Joe Rogan to say that Social Security was, quote, the biggest Ponzi scheme of all time. The billionaire Secretary of Commerce, Howard Lutnick, said that his mother-in-law wouldn't even notice or care if her check didn't arrive, that only fraudsters would complain if their check didn't arrive on time or at all. And Donald Trump himself, who stood in front of Congress and delivered an address so riddled with false claims about Social Security that it was impossible to disguise his true intention. And that is to sow mistrust, broad mistrust, so they can come for it all, so they can slash it and leave seniors in the lurch, so they can privatize it. That is their plan for much of the federal government. First, they cut the staff, then they cut the services, and finally they say, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. Privatize it. Let the billionaires run it. Put it in the market. What could possibly go wrong? Have you seen the market lately? Leaving your hard-earned benefits to the whims of the stock market that Donald Trump has so recently destroyed, plunging millions of seniors into poverty. That is their plan, all for a few more bucks in their pockets. It is up to each of us to stop them, to protect Social Security and Medicaid. But I want to talk for a moment, not to my colleagues here in this fancy building, but to you at home. Whether you're in California or anywhere else in the country, I want to talk to you. Right now, I'm standing on the floor of the United States Senate. In just a few hours, we will be voting on a budget resolution that sets the framework for government funding. Now, that may sound wonky or unimportant, complex and complicated, but I want to cut through the noise and speak to you about exactly what this will do. In the simplest terms, it will make your life more expensive, make your health care more inaccessible, and sow the seeds to slowly destroy or privatize Social Security. It will do these things because Donald Trump and Elon Musk do not care about you. They don't care about you. They care about Donald Trump and Elon Musk. They care about their billionaire buddies. They care about their bank accounts. They don't care about you or the fact that whether you can afford a home or you can't afford a home, whether you have the money to take vacation days that you have saved up, whether you can afford to take your kid to the hospital, whether you have to drive 2 or 3 hours to the nearest hospital, they don't care. They don't care if you're paying $6 for eggs, $5 for a gallon of gas, or depending where you live, maybe a lot more. They may say they care about those things, but this, their bill that we're about to vote on, says otherwise. This bill in my hand is evidence you. Now, it's easy to feel hopeless and powerless right now. That's their goal. That's how they want you to feel. They want you to look at the remnants of your retirement savings and the closing of hospitals and the destruction of small businesses and the decimation of schools, and they want you to feel discouraged, to look at the wreckage and say, well, I guess they're right. Maybe none of it does work. Because they want to break it all in pieces. When they tear things down that you rely on instead of building them up, they want to turn to you and say, see, none of this is working. Medicaid isn't working, and Social Security isn't working because they broke it, because they're breaking it. And then comes the final step. That's when they sell it all for parts, where they sell off the Social Security you paid into for your whole life, when they destroy the health care that you and your family rely on. So you're forced to pay for private insurance that costs more and helps you less. That is their plan. And you're watching it unfold in real time. That's the thing with Donald Trump. He's broken every promise he's made. Lower prices? No. Stock market growth? Hard opposite. Your 401k, if you're lucky enough to have one, destroyed. A new golden era? Don't make me laugh. Protecting your hard-earned benefits? They're on the chopping block right now. Donald Trump has broken every single promise he's made except one. The promise he made from a gold-plated Mar-a-Lago podium when he told a room full of the richest people in America, and I quote, "You're all people that have a lot of money. You're rich as hell. We're going to give you tax cuts." Well, it turns out those tax cuts are arriving right on schedule, and we will be footing the bill. But you can do something about it. You are not powerless. Make your voices heard. Madam President, I yield back.
Senator from Delaware.
I get a lot of questions from my constituents. Delawareans raise a lot of issues, whether they're stopping me at the Wawa, talking to me on the train, knocking on my door. They ask me about three things, more than anything in the last few months. They're concerned about Elon Musk having huge access to their personally identifying information. They're concerned about the richest man on earth, who they didn't elect, getting into their data. They're concerned about Trump's tariff tax and how the tariffs he's just imposed are yanking up prices for everything in our country. And they're also deeply concerned about Social Security. I'm going to focus for a few minutes about the alarm I'm hearing from Delawareans that the Trump administration, Elon Musk, and Republicans in Congress are going after our Social Security net, the social safety net, the Social Security benefits that so many rely on for stability and security in their lives, as part of the bill that's moving on this floor tonight to help pay for tax cuts for billionaires that are buddies of Elon Musk. Ask American seniors what they think of Social Security, and they'll tell you it's an earned benefit. It's a vital lifeline. It's the thing that keeps them out of poverty, pays for their medication, helps them afford rent, helps them live decently and safely. 70 million Americans get Social Security benefits every month. 4 out of 10 rely on it for a majority of their income. A few quick examples. Arlene reached out to my office. Arlene's a Delawarean whose husband died in January, and she relies on Social Security to keep paying her bills. Senator, what's going to happen? Ian, a disabled adult who's able to work a few hours a week but requires assistance with simple tasks, from his mother due to his intellectual disabilities. Without Social Security and the disability benefits he gets, his whole livelihood is at risk. Kathleen reached out to tell me what she thinks of Social Security. She said, and I quote, "I'm a 64-year-old disabled woman. I'm concerned about my Social Security disability. I'm totally dependent on that check, and I'm terrified of what's happening with Doge." Cheryl Ann wrote my office saying, "I'm 68 and still work to keep from falling behind in my bills. Since COVID, prices have gone up, and with all these new tariffs or taxes, seniors can't make ends meet. I want to retire, but I'm afraid that with Trump messing with Social Security and Medicaid, how can I?" A simple question then. What happens to Arlene, Ian, Kathleen, Cheryl Ann if Republicans are successful in further undermining the stability and the reliability of Social Security? What happens to millions like them for whom this program is what keeps them able to afford their medications, keeps food on the table, keeps a roof over their heads? I've told you what Delawareans think of Social Security, but if you ask Elon Musk, he'll be clear. He's called it a Ponzi scheme. Maybe you don't know Mr. Ponzi. A Ponzi scheme is a fraud. It's something that's fake. It's a Jenga puzzle that comes tumbling down when you pull one of the key pieces. A Ponzi scheme is a fraud. Already, the Doge boys are slashing the workforce at Social Security. They're making it harder for seniors to get the benefits they've earned. They're cutting the budget, firing employees, closing offices, and these needless cuts will just make it harder for seniors to get answers to their questions and to get their checks, forcing those seniors who live in rural areas or who are disabled, like the few I just cited, to struggle to access what they've earned. Doing all of this in the name of cutting waste and fraud is compelling because where there is waste and fraud, we should go after it. But there are tiny amounts of fraud in this program. Don't take my word for it. Listen to Lee Dudek, the Trump administration's chosen acting Social Security commissioner. Lee Dudek, the Trump administration's acting Social Security administrator, at a press conference just last month, estimated that of all the Social Security payments every year, 0.00625%, less than 0.1% are fraudulent. That's actually, I'm sorry, less than 0.01%. To give you some context, if you think about the entire world, the landmass of the world that is covered by Delaware is 0.003%. And Delaware is pretty small, and the world's pretty big. That gives you a sense just how small the fraud is in this program that is treasured by Americans. Doge's favorite talking point about dead people collecting Social Security has been debunked more times than I can count. They claim there's people 200, 300 years old still getting benefits. Trump even said, President Trump said the same thing right here in the Capitol in his address to Congress as he read out the names of folks 200, 250, 300 years old. There's only one problem. It's not true that they're getting benefits. The badly outdated Social Security computer system has a problem with birth dates, and it automatically adds a reference point in certain date errors that's 150 years ago. So yes, there are names on a register of people who were born, allegedly, a long time ago. But for the last decade, the Social Security Administration automatically stops payments to anyone over 115 years old. Automatically. The checks aren't going out to people whose birth date is recorded as 200 or 250 years old. An independent inspector general looked at this question and said, almost none of the number holders discussed in the report receive payments. So if the fraud doesn't exist, why do they keep talking about it? Well, they have to find ways to pay for tax breaks for billionaires. House Republicans have made plain they want to cut $2 trillion in spending to pay for their massive reconciliation bill that we will soon turn to. And you can't do that without touching Medicaid or Social Security. Let me conclude. Social Security is not a giveaway. It's not riddled with waste, fraud, and abuse. And Democrats are united in protecting Medicaid and Social Security. We need to strengthen Social Security, not cut it. And I stand with my colleagues and every Democrat in this body in saying, hands off of Social Security, President Trump and Elon Musk. Thank you, Madam President. With that, I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from Hawaii.
Madam President, leave Social Security alone. Leave Social Security alone. Donald Trump wants to gut the most successful anti-poverty program in American history. Over the past 3 months, his administration has made sweeping cuts to Social Security in ways that are already being felt across the country. Wait times have doubled to as many as 4 or 5 hours. Local field offices are closing, websites are crashing, and people are understandably panicked about getting checks or missing payments altogether. But according to Commerce Secretary Lutnick, there is nothing to worry about. Quote, let's say Social Security didn't send out their checks this month. My mother-in-law, who's 94, she wouldn't call and complain. She just wouldn't. She'd think something got messed up and she'd get it next month. She wouldn't complain. Well, when your son-in-law is a billionaire, a missed check is not a very big deal. But when you're a senior on the island of Oahu, where the average rent far exceeds the average benefit. I want you to understand that. The average benefit is about $1,900. The average rent is more than $2,000. 300,000 people in the state of Hawaii depend on Social Security, and the vast majority of them, Social Security is either all of their income or most of their income. The idea that we are going to balance the budget on the backs of seniors who have paid into an earned benefit is immoral. It is wrong. And I speak on behalf of all of my constituents who depend on it. It's not just the 300,000, it's all of the family members. It's all of the family members. I speak on behalf of my mother and father-in-law, George and Ping Kwok. George Kwok worked all his life in a kitchen. Sometimes he was an employee. He eventually ended up owning a place called Kwok's Chop Suey. He sold it and bought a home for his mom and helped to send his daughter to college. Then he started to get blind, and he burned his hand in a fryer. And so he was unable to work, and he took Social Security disability. He deserves that money. Leave Social Security alone. Social Security cuts were always the third rail in American politics. Even anyone on any side of the aisle with any sense of how to get elected knew not to touch that third rail, but they are grabbing this third rail with both hands. I want to quote a couple of my constituents. One constituent wrote to me, "We are elderly and we are concerned about the potential of cutting Social Security checks. We paid into the system our entire working lives and fear we can't afford food, water bills, and medical care. What will happen with these cuts and the cost of living going up? What will be our safety net? We are afraid of what's to come." Another wrote, "I worked for 36 years for the federal government, including 4 years as active duty Air Force in Vietnam. I contributed to Social Security with the explicit understanding that I would get Social Security as a portion of my retirement. Cutting Social Security means I lose about a third of my retirement with no recourse. I am 77 years old with health issues and haven't planned on getting another job. My wife was a flight attendant for Hawaiian Airlines for 50 years and also depends on Social Security for her retirement. It is completely unfair when she paid into Social Security for more than 50 years just to be abandoned when she is 70 years old." Another constituent. "I'm a 73-year-old woman who, unlike billionaire Commerce Secretary Lutnick's mother-in-law, cannot afford to miss or reduce my Social Security payment. It is my sole income, and I needed to pay rent and buy food. I worked hard all my life and contributed my fair share of taxes towards Social Security. I'm not asking for a free ride. I earned my Social Security. I am not asking for a free ride. I earned my Social Security. Leave Social Security alone. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Where is she? Oh, Senator from Minnesota.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise today to call out the threat that this Republican budget and the Trump administration poses to Social Security. President Trump and Elon Musk's move fast and break things mentality is breaking Social Security. And it is obvious that they intend to dismantle Social Security, which will hurt the millions of Americans that rely on it, that count on it, including more than 1 million Minnesotans. Now, one thing that I have learned over the last 70-some plus days is to believe these guys when they tell us what they mean to do. So when Musk recently called Social Security the biggest Ponzi scheme of all time, I'm sure that he meant it. And when he said entitlement spending is, and I quote, the big one to eliminate, I believe him. And then you have Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, who recently said that if his 94-year-old mother-in-law happened to not receive her Social Security check in 1 month, she'd just wait for the next one. Well, I have news for Secretary Lutnick. When people don't get their Social Security checks, they aren't just waiting for the next check, they could be waiting for their next meal. Secretary Lutnick is clearly not in touch with the reality that 22 million Americans, including more than 16 million seniors, would be living in poverty were it not for Social Security. They don't have bank accounts millions sitting in a bank account somewhere. They have a food shelf visit or missed rent or rationing their prescription medication ahead of them. So this is not just an inconvenience or a hassle for them. It is their security, their dignity, their health, and their well-being. And, you know, it's not just Musk and Lutnick that are out of touch. Acting Social Security Commissioner Leland Dudnick threatened to shut down the entire agency in a fit after a federal judge informed him that DOJ is not allowed to root around in people's personal data. And Frank Bisignano, a billionaire that is President Trump's pick to run the Social Security Administration, he has said that he is a DOJ person, and I believe him. And this is evidently just fine with Senate Republicans on the Finance Committee who all voted for him. And I have no doubt that the rest of the Republicans in the Senate will too, because they seem unwilling or unable to stand up to Donald Trump. I think they're just scared. Now, President Trump understands that Americans love Social Security, and so he says, don't worry, my administration won't touch it. Come on now. Americans understand. We can see what's happening. And as my mother used to say, I wasn't born yesterday. We can see that President Trump and Elon Musk are crippling Social Security by making it nearly impossible for people to get their benefits. They are closing field offices at the same time that they're limiting phone service. They're gutting the agency and firing the employees that make Social Security work. In Alexandria, Minnesota, for example, they've fired half the staff. In Rochester, Minnesota, they've fired 40% of the staff. Since Donald Trump took office, the number of calls for help with Social Security into my office has more than doubled compared to what it was in the same time frame last year. So my constituents are spending hours and hours on hold and waiting for office appointments. And every time they get a message from Social Security, it's a different story. And it's confusing, and it is more than irritating. It's downright scary to them. Now, you can call this rank incompetence or the don't know, don't care attitude of this administration, but what it looks like to me is sabotage. If Republicans are trying to save Social Security, this is a pretty funny way to go about it. And now tonight, they're going to try and pass a budget resolution that relies on so-called cost savings from firing Social Security employees to help pay for trillions of dollars of tax breaks for billionaires and big corporations. There's talk about rooting out waste and fraud, and I'm all for that. But understand, this agency already spends less than 1% on administrative overhead, which is far lower than the administrative costs typically paid by private insurers. So when they say cutting costs, what that really means is that when a senior picks up the phone looking for assistance, there's not going to be anyone on the other end of the line. They talk about getting at fraud. Well, listen to this. The Office of the Inspector General conducted a report in 2024 which found that less than 1% of Social Security payments were improper. Less than 1%. You know, if the Social Security Administration was a private sector company, those numbers would put its competitors to shame. What's really happening here is that they are trying to make it harder for people to get what they are owed. And that is, in fact, a cut, and it is wrong. Now, I think that Americans can see what's happening. Donald Trump has surrounded himself with billionaires who don't know and really don't care about regular people who are just trying to afford their lives. They can't even imagine trying to live on $2,000 a month, which is the average benefit for a retiree in Minnesota. I mean, they probably spend more than that on lunch. This is not what we need in this country. We need this government to answer to the people, not the billionaires. We don't need more tax breaks for the wealthiest and most successful people who are doing just fine. Thank you very much. What we need to do is to make Social Security work better for people who have worked hard all their lives, paid in, and deserve a secure retirement. My office, Mr. President, has also received tens of thousands of messages from Minnesotans, and they want us to protect and to strengthen Social Security, not tear it down. And so that's what I'm going to do. Social Security is a universal benefit, and it is a promise that we have made to each other that after a lifetime of hard work, you won't have to worry about a safe, decent, affordable place to call home, a good meal to eat, and the time and the space to enjoy your life. And when this budget resolution gets a vote later tonight, I'll be thinking about Social Security and about the 73 million Americans who count on it, and I will be a hard no. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Senator from Oregon.
I ask unanimous consent that Chance Mitchell, a law clerk on the Budget Committee minority staff, be granted floor privileges during the consideration of House Resolution 14.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Throughout these 25 hours of debate, there's been one theme that no member of this body should forget, that no American should forget, because it's the heart of this bill. And what is the heart of the bill? Families lose and billionaires win. This bill features $2 trillion in cuts to core programs in health care, housing, and education, the programs that help families stand on their feet and thrive and move into the middle class and succeed, and their children succeed, and the next generation. But no, my Republican colleagues say, slash those programs, because they're not the folks who power our campaigns. We don't care about the families struggling to succeed. Well, no, what we care about are the billionaires. So we wrote this bill for billionaires. Just how much? Well, that $2 trillion funds tax breaks for the richest Americans. And then, because that's not enough, this bill borrows $37 trillion over 30 years to fund additional tax breaks. $37 trillion in debt. Cuts to programs for families to fund tax giveaways to the richest Americans. That's what this is about. If you care about health care across America, if you know that Medicaid provides, well, in my state, about a third of our citizens have health insurance through Medicaid, our rural clinics, our rural hospitals do far better. And why do they do far better with Medicaid? Because patients can pay bills because they have health insurance. Medicaid, critical for programs for people to get out of their addiction. Medicaid, critical for seniors to be able to get nursing home care. Medicaid, essential for those with disabilities. It plays a huge role for our veterans. And they want to strike it down. And they want to strike down Social Security. Get rid of all the clerks that make Social Security work, that turn the gears and make sure the checks go out on time. Because why should we worry about Social Security? Billionaires don't need Social Security. Strike that down. How about lunch programs for schools? We know that kids learn far better when they have a full stomach. So programs like that matter, but not to the billionaires, not in this bill. $2 trillion in cuts for programs families depend on to fund massive tax giveaways to the richest Americans. And then, on top of all that, a gimmick to say to the American people, while we're adding $37 trillion in debt, we'll tell you we're adding nothing. It's called current policy baseline. It's magic math. It's like this. You rent an apartment. Apartment costs you $2,000 a month, $24,000 over the year. You rent it for a year under contract. And then you get to the end of the year and you say, I think I'll sign a contract for a second year. And you say, oh, but that will cost nothing. That's the magic math. Well, we know, everyone knows it'll still cost $2,000 a month or more with inflation. More because the rent might go up. But the magic math from the Republican side says, no, it's zero. It's zero. Extending new tax benefits that would have expired costs $37 trillion. And Republicans say, just pretend it away. Now, what I would like to understand is why the party that has often run on fiscal responsibility has decided, first of all, to strike down the nonpartisan numbers that create an honest debate. That's been the rule, the direction, the bipartisan consensus since 1974. We will use honest numbers. We created a whole organization, the Congressional Budget Office, to make sure the numbers were fair so we could have an honest debate here and with the American people. But the magic math produced on this bill throws all that overboard. Fiscal responsibility overboard. Massive $37 trillion in new debt from this bill. You know what? Our entire national debt today is less than $37 trillion. This one bill produces even more debt that's been piled up over 249 years since the Declaration of Independence. If that isn't fiscally irresponsible, I don't know what is. You know, you may ask, don't those folks who are struggling, the 1 out of 10 who are really trying to get on their feet at the bottom, is there something for them? Well, the estimate is that they get the equivalent of $6 a year. Well, I mean, if you have a fancy cup of coffee at Starbucks, not where I go for coffee, but many do, it costs about $6. This bill doesn't give a cup of coffee a day to the bottom 10%. It doesn't give a cup of coffee a week to the bottom 10%. It gives 1 cup per year. That's what you get out of this bill if you're in the bottom 10% struggling to get on your feet. Don't drink it all at once. Just one little sip each day for 365 days. Because you, in the bottom 10%, are not a billionaire. Going to cut your programs that get you on your feet, the fundamentals for families to thrive in healthcare and housing and education and good-paying jobs to enrich the richest Americans. This is perhaps the worst bill I have ever seen debated on the floor of the Senate. So colleagues across the aisle, turn back to your speeches and your election campaigns that said, I'm for fiscal responsibility, and come and join us and write a real bill in which families thrive and billionaires pay their fair share of taxes. That would be an advance for the United States of America. That would be good work on the floor of the Senate. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from South Carolina.
Different view on this. To my good friend from Oregon, who has been a real gentleman to work with, and you got a great staff, and I appreciate our ability to work together, but we have a little different view of what we're doing here tonight. So I'm going to give you our side of the story. I got charts too. I never thought I'd have a chart, but I got one. We're trying to do sort of four things tonight. Start a process that we can make the tax cuts permanent, give money to the Department of Homeland Security to continue to secure our border, cut trillions of dollars of waste, which does exist, and support our military. Now, the bill tonight, the resolution, opens up that process that will be done by the House and the Senate authorizing committees. So this doesn't do anything other than start the game. And it's time this game started. Now, what's in this for you if you're not a billionaire, which I am not? If we do nothing, the 2017 President Trump tax cuts expire in December. None of them voted for it. They're going to expire, and what does that mean to you? 6 million jobs will be lost. The average taxpayer would see a 22% tax hike if the tax cuts expire. A family of four making $80,610, the median income in the United States, would see a $1,695 tax increase if they expire this December. This is worth about 9 weeks of groceries. 40 million families would see their household child $695 tax increase if they expire this December. This is worth about 9 weeks of groceries. 40 million families would see their household child tax credit cut in half. If any of y'all listening out there that not a billionaire, you might want to keep listening. If this expires, you're going to get hit hard, and we don't want that. 26 million small businesses would be hit with a 43.4% top tax rate if Section 199A of the small business deduction expires. Now, why I know about that one? I can't walk 5 feet in South Carolina without somebody begging me to make sure that expensing and deductions and accelerated depreciation doesn't go away, because they run a business. Our friends over there run the government. That's all they know. They're very good at making it bigger, not very good at making it efficient. There's no amount of money that's enough for these folks. So if you're looking for that crowd over there to cut your taxes, you're looking in the wrong direction. I got about 100 years to prove that point. The point I'm trying to make is these tax cuts expiring matter to real people raising a family and trying to run a business, particularly small business. This would be devastating. We're not going to let that happen. Now, if you're waiting for this crowd, our friends on the other side, to cut spending, you're going to die waiting. Now, we have a chance as Republicans, if we pass this resolution tonight, to cut spending and make the tax cuts permanent without one Democratic vote. It's called reconciliation. To my Republican friends who may be watching, 4 times in the last 100 years, the Republicans had the House, the Senate, and the White House. This doesn't happen a lot. But with that construct, through reconciliation, what we're starting here tonight, if we get 50 plus 1, we can make the tax cuts permanent and cut spending without one Democratic vote. This is what they use, Democratic friends, to pass Obamacare, all the spending around infrastructure spending, Inflation Reduction Act, which really didn't do much to reduce inflation. They've done this, and we're going to do it a different way. They did it to grow the government. We're going to do it in a way to get more money back to you. And we're going to look at the budget we have up here and see if we can find a way to save some money. Don't you think it's time that we looked at the budget up here like you look at your budget? And we're going to do that. And we're going to secure our border. We don't talk enough about this. In this package, there's $175 billion that will allow the Trump administration to finish the wall. Now, President Trump said during the State of the Union address The Democrats said we needed new laws. We just really did need a new president. We got a new president, and the flow has really almost stopped. One of the most amazing things that we don't talk enough about. But we want to make sure it doesn't come back on again. So this bill gives the Department of Homeland Security, ICE, Tom Holman, $175 billion to finish the wall, to build, to find more detention bed space, 40,000 to 125,000, so we don't have to let people go. Laken Riley, who was killed by a legal immigrant, he was released because they had no bed space. We don't ever do that again. We're going to build enough detention beds so we don't have to release anybody. I think most people like that. We're going to hire more ICE agents to kick the gang members and the crooks out faster so we can get control of our country and our security. This bill allows $175 billion. That's enough for the entire 4 years, if Republicans stick together. So, as a Republican, you said you want to cut waste, you want to cut people's taxes, and you want to secure the border. Your ship has come in. What's near and dear to my heart, like most everybody here, including our Democratic friends, is supporting our military. Well, the budget agreement we reached a few years ago was terrible. The continuing resolution to fund the government through September is below that number. We're spending below inflation on our military. In case you haven't missed it, the world's literally on fire. So this bill gives the Pentagon $150 billion right now to help them upgrade their capability to deal with threats like Iran getting a nuclear weapon. This is good stuff. And the only thing standing between you and this good stuff is a vote tonight continuing a process in the House and the Senate to make it a reality. But if we don't get it right tonight, all this dies. All this opportunity dies if Republicans don't stick together, and you know what? We will. All right, so now all this stuff about me and the budget chairman. What did I do? Well, I made a decision. Last time I checked, if you win an election, you get to make decisions. You know, I'm the budget chairman. It's been a lot of fun. I've learned a lot, I can tell you that. So in the 1974 Budget Control Act, when it comes to spending, you never have to offset it. Anything above $50 million in spending, you can use current policy, which is a budget scoring device that just assumes everything goes forever, no offsets. It's my belief that when it comes to tax reductions, I, as the budget chairman, can apply that same concept called current policy to the budget on this floor, and I will do that. I have done that. Now, what does that mean? If we're able to do for taxes what we've done for spending, that means the tax cuts never expire again, and you don't have this cliff putting everybody at risk. That means if we pass what we've put together in the Budget Committee, and Senator Marshall's a member of the committee, we passed a really good proposal to make sure that these tax cuts that we're going to reauthorize stay in place so people throughout the country can count on some certainty when it comes to tax credits for their children, deductions and expensing for their businesses, and having lower rates. I did it. I am proud to do it. And my Democratic friends who are hollering and screaming have done it too, but it always relates to spending. So Judd Gregg, who's a good friend of ours, one of the smartest guys I ever met, was on the Budget Committee. He and Kent Conrad were a great team. And there was a question, can the Farm Bill be added to the baseline? And here's what Judd Gregg said about a Democrat's ability to do that. The chairman of the Budget Committee declared the new baseline under a new budget. The budget chairman has a right to do that. The budget chairman changed the baseline to accommodate the Farm Bill. I'm declaring current policy to make sure the tax cuts stay in place. And when there was an inquiry of a parliamentarian about whose job it is to declare the baseline, this was what Judd Gregg asked, Who is the proper scorer of points of order relative to revenues and expenses? And here's what was said. The senator is entitled to an answer under Congressional Budget Act of 1974, termination of points of order, Section 312, the Budget Committee determination for purposes of this title and Title IV, the levels measuring budget authority outlays, direct spending, new entitlement authority, revenues for fiscal year shall be determined on the basis of the estimates made by the committee on the budget of the House of Representatives or the Senate as applicable. That's us. That's me. They asked that question in 2008, and that's what they said. Judge Gregg said it's the Budget Committee chairman's authority to determine the baseline, and that's what I did. Okay. And even Bernie agreed, so we don't need to overly dwell on that. This is what the law says. Revenues and spending shall be determined on the basis of estimates made by the committee on the budget of the House of Representatives or the Senate as applicable. That's us. We're elected officials. And wouldn't it be odd if you wrote a law that somebody would manage the law nobody voted for? It makes like 0 sense. All right, now, next one, is that it? Okay, so bottom line, tax cuts are going to be permanent. It will help the economy. And when it comes to estimating what happens around here, CBO, great people, JCT, Joint Commission on Taxation, they make estimates. The one thing they've been consistent about is being wrong when it comes to tax revenue. They've got it wrong like every time. So if history is any guide to what's happened in the past, we're going to get more revenue by cutting taxes. Why do I know that? Because it always happens. What happens all the time too? When we get the new money, we spend it faster than we get it. That's going to stop. If you live in the real world, you get a pay raise. That's a great thing. But if you spend it all and then some, you go right back in debt. So we're going to do two things. We're going to start a process that will allow the tax cuts to be permanent, to give the economy certainty to grow, to create more revenue, to help the government do what it needs to do. And we're going to cut spending to make sure that we lower the amount we're spending, because we're spending too much, with the hope of one day doing this, balancing the budget. I said it. I have not been struck dead yet. Our goal to the American people is to create more revenue and lower spending to balance the budget like you do. Now, we don't do this in this resolution, but we start the process because we're $30-something trillion in debt. The only thing between the tax cuts being permanent, having money to secure the border, help the military, and what's the other thing that we're going to do? Cutting spending, is a vote tonight, sometime after midnight, before breakfast, I hope, we'll have a vote in the United States Senate that will trigger a process to do these four things. I am proud of the Budget Committee. We've worked hard. I am proud of Leader Thune, who's pushed this process forward. I appreciate the cooperation to the extent they can do it on the other side. We have a philosophical difference. I totally understand that. But we've chosen a different path. And a major step along that path will occur later tonight. And if we get this right, by Memorial Day, it's my fervent hope and prayer, and I just talked to President Trump, that we can pass one big, beautiful bill that makes the 2017 tax cuts permanent, and even more, tax on tips for all those people working out there as waiters and waitresses. We have a chance here to look at the federal budget line by line to make sure things in there that make no sense are taken out to save you money. And boy, we're going to have some fun tonight talking about those things. And if you believe securing the border is a good thing and what we're doing is the right thing, by Memorial Day, we'll have fully funded what President Trump needs for all 4 years. That will be amazing. And if you're in the military, money is coming your way to help you do your job to make sure the rest of us are safe. And we're going to fix the problem with the continuing resolution by giving the military less than inflation at a time when the world's literally on fire. So if we can get it right tonight, by Memorial Day, I'm hoping and praying that the men and women in uniform will have $150 billion they desperately need to do their job and to stay safe. This is the most important thing I have done yet in the Senate, in my view. I've set in motion, along with my colleagues, and if there's ever a team sport, it's politics, the ability to do something we haven't done before, makes taxes and spending the same in terms of policy. Quit playing this game that the American people lose. You will not lose $1 revenue if we make these tax cuts permanent. You'll get more money. But if you keep spending more and more, that doesn't matter. But if you get more revenue and you cut spending, one day we will be on a glide path to balance this budget. It is my fervent desire to do that, and President Trump wants to do it. Let it be said that that starts tonight. I yield.
Mr. President. Democratic leader. Mr. President. Democratic leader. For the past 2 days, Democrats have turned the Senate into a tribunal. And Donald Trump's, could we please have order? Thank you. Mr. President, for the past 2 days, Democrats have turned the Senate into a tribunal. And Donald Trump's agenda is on trial. I thank the close to 40 of my colleagues who came to the floor and made so many points about that. So now Donald Trump's agenda is on trial. It's time now for Republicans to answer. Tonight, Democrats will bring amendment after amendment to the floor, one right after the other, again and again and again. Our amendments will give Republicans the chance to join us in hitting the kill switch on Donald Trump's tariffs, on DOGE, on the attacks against Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. Now, Republicans are in the majority. The choice is theirs. They see what Americans see. Donald Trump's policies are a disaster. DOGE is a horror. Republicans could snuff it out instantly, tonight, if they wanted. Will Republicans join us tonight and stand up to Donald Trump before he craters the economy? Or will Republicans spend all night trying to defend the mess Donald Trump is making? And he made a lot more of it today. Will Republicans defend Donald Trump's tariff tax, the Trump tariff tax, which would cost families $5,000 a year? Will they defend Elon Musk as he takes a blowtorch to Social Security? Will they defend cutting Medicaid and imperil the health care of 70 million Americans, from newborn kids to seniors to rural communities and veterans? Will Republicans spend all night long, trying to explain to the American people why billionaires deserve a massive tax break, but working people don't deserve basic health care? The choice is theirs. Donald Trump has betrayed the American people. Will Senate Republicans join him in this betrayal? I yield the floor.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, very soon the Senate's going to be voting on a budget resolution that essentially accomplishes 5 objectives, but at least 4. And one is to prevent a $4 trillion tax increase on the American people at the end of the year, number 1. Number 2, it rebuilds our military by investing in our military readiness in a way that will enable us to deal with and deter the threats that America deals with in a very dangerous world. It will restore energy dominance for our country, making energy more affordable to the American people, something that we saw a huge run-up during the Biden inflation days. Part of that, in a big way, was the cost of energy. Obviously, securing the border. And there are resources in there to make sure that over the course of the next 4 years of this administration that they have what they need to ensure that our border is secure and that the American people are safe. And finally, Mr. President, reducing spending. Now, I know that's a sort of a novel concept around here. We've heard a lot about, massive tax cuts for billionaires. That's been a recurring theme that we've heard from the Democrats. But the one thing you don't hear a lot about is the run-up in federal spending. So tax revenues, as a general rule, have stayed very static as a percentage of our entire economy, around 17.1% thereabouts. Government spending as a percentage of our economy, on the other hand, has gone up, and gone up dramatically. So just take a look at this chart. Basically, in the last 5 years, the run-up that we've seen in spending has been about 56% from 2019 to 2024. 56% increase in spending. Now, what's ironic about that, Mr. President, is government revenue's also been going up, right? Everybody said, well, you're going to cut taxes, we're going to run these big deficits. Well, what happened? In 2017, we cut taxes on the American people, we unleashed the American economy, we reduced rates, accelerated cost recovery, so people could recover their capital investments more quickly. What did? They invested. And it created more, not less revenue. $1.5 trillion more than was projected at the time by the Joint Committee on Taxation and the CBO. $1.5 trillion more revenue than what was projected. I think you can say they missed it by a long shot. Well, this time around, we've seen estimates, and Senator Graham, Senator Crapo were down here earlier today, suggesting that the Council of Economic Advisors' prediction is that you will see revenue increase by about $4 trillion by making the 2017 tax law permanent. So what we have, Mr. President, the reason we're running these big deficits isn't because we tax too little, it's because we spend too much. That's the delta. Tax revenues have gone up, and gone up consistently over time, particularly since 2017. What's gone up a lot faster, as I said, is government spending. And so we have this deficit, and the way we're going to have to deal with that is to get more growth in the economy, generate more revenue, because when the economy is growing and expanding, it's creating jobs, people are working, they're taking realizations, and they're paying more taxes. And that's what happens when you reduce taxes. And that's why it's so important that we extend and make permanent the 2017 tax law. This is what we're talking about here today. This is what this conversation, frankly, is all about. Now, Mr. President, one of the things that has been interesting in this debate, because I heard lots of conversation from my colleagues on the other side about massive new tax cuts for billionaires. But let me tell you what, if you vote against this budget resolution, you will be voting for. You will be voting for a $4 trillion tax increase on our economy and on the American people. Of that $4 trillion tax increase, $2.6 trillion will fall on people who make less than $400,000 a year. Something that Joe Biden and I think pretty much every Senate Democrat pledged not to do. Well, how does that happen, you ask? Well, here's what happens. In 2017, when we passed the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, one of the things, the features of that bill, was a doubling of the child tax credit from $1,000 to $2,000. It also had a near doubling of the standard deduction, and it had a lowering of rates. It had multiple ways in which working families in this country would benefit. If we don't extend the tax relief before the end of the year, $2.6 trillion of that tax increase falls on people making less than $400,000 a year. Now, I've heard the Democrats' own presidential candidate said last year, and I quote, "We cannot, and I will not, raise taxes on anyone making less than $400,000 a year." That was Vice President Harris, who was running for president. President Biden made the same promise, as did the current Democrat leader. And when the Democrats were considering their so-called Inflation Reduction Act, which perhaps more aptly could have been titled Do Nothing About Inflation Act, the Democrat leader repeatedly emphasized the Democrats would not be raising taxes on anyone making less than $400,000 a year. Well, that's it. That's what you're doing. Because this tax increase is going to hit American families. $2.6 trillion of it is going to hit families making less than $400,000 a year. So you cut the child tax credit. Let's say you have 4 kids in this country. Now, the tax credit, child tax credit, is a direct credit against tax liability, meaning it's a dollar-for-dollar reduction in tax liability if you have a tax liability that exceeds the amount of the credit. So let's say you have 4 kids. Today it's $2,000. Well, if we don't move to extend this tax relief by the end of the year, that $1,000 is going to be from $8,000 down to $4,000, $2,000 per child down to $1,000 per child, and that family's taxes are going to go up by about $4,000. Now, if they don't have that big of a tax liability, there's a refundability component, and we can have a conversation about the merits of that, but that means they're going to be getting a payment or not, and probably not, because cutting that child tax credit back to $1,000 is going to fall largely on people who have families in this country. Same thing with the standard deduction. It will be cut nearly in half. And the interesting thing about that, Mr. President, is when we made that change back in 2017, fewer people started itemizing, more people started taking the standard deduction because the standard deduction was about $30,000 a year. Well, what happens if we don't extend this tax relief? That $30,000 goes back down to about $15,000 a year. Again, hitting working families, coupled again with what I said is higher rates. The rates will go back up. So forget about the idea that you're not going to raise taxes on people making less than $400,000 a year, because you clearly are. That's just a fact. It's just simply a fact. So what about small businesses? Well, small businesses would pay, if we don't extend the current tax policy, $600 billion more if these tax cuts expire. Because pass-through businesses, and that's your LLCs, your subchapter S corporations, your sole proprietorships, pay at the individual rate. The rates would go back up, and we put a feature in that bill called 199A. It was a 20% deduction for pass-through businesses. That also goes away. So small businesses are going to pay $600,000 more per year, or I should say, or $600 billion more throughout the course of this tax policy if we don't do something to extend it. So you lose 199A, you lose the lower rates that come with it if you're a small business, and you'll see a lot less investment in our economy. Now, as I mentioned in 2017, 2 of the objectives on that, particularly on the business side, were to lower rates and to allow for faster cost recovery and to grow the economy. And it did. It worked. The economy over the past 7 years grew, if you can believe this, 5.4% more than what CBO had projected in 2017 prior to the passage of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Well, what did that mean? It meant a 50-year low for unemployment, record low poverty, high median household income, a narrowing of the income disparity gap in this country. So, Mr. President, what about deficits? As I said before, by any objective metric, revenues dramatically exceeded what was predicted in 2017 about what the effect of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act would be. Now, revenues, as I mentioned, you look at this chart again, on average about 17% as a percentage of our economy. Unfortunately, spending as a percentage of our economy, which as recently as a decade ago was about 20%, is now over 23%, and growing to 24 to 25%. And part of that is all the new spending that was associated with things like, for example, the IRA. So the inflation, so-called Inflation Reduction Act, there were some provisions in there, some energy provisions, for example, that at the time were scored to cost about a little over $200 billion. Today, they're actually over $1 trillion, so CBO missed that one by about 400%. And as I said earlier, the Council of Economic Advisors projects a $4.1 trillion increase in revenue from extending the 2017 law. So could it be that the run-up in deficits happened because of the last two Democrat reconciliation bills? Or perhaps some other things that they have done along the way, like the $250 billion in SNAP increase, almost, as I said, without any approval from Congress, something that my colleagues on the other side have talked about, how this executive branch has, ignored the will of Congress. Well, that was a $250 billion increase without approval from Congress. Then you had the student loan forgiveness program, and as you recall, student loans, that program was used as a pay-for back in a reconciliation bill the Democrats did back in 2010. And when they did that, many of us predicted that they would go ahead and use it to forgive student loans. So student loan now forgiveness, which is subject to court action, resulted in several $100 billion of additional spending not approved by the Congress, but that particular move got no pushback from anybody on this side of the aisle, not a peep. Hundreds of billions of dollars of spending by use of executive power. And what I concluded from all this is that my colleagues on the other side talk a lot about misuse or abuse, if you will, of executive power, but that's not the issue. It's how the executive power is used. And if it's used in a way that you agree with, which it was in both of those examples I just mentioned, then you're fine with use of executive power. Like I said, didn't hear a peep from people over here when that was done. Now, my colleagues, both Senator Graham and Senator Crapo, talked about the use of a current policy baseline. So in 2012, the Obama White House came up with something called the alternative fiscal scenario when it came time to extend the Bush tax cuts. And that was about a $4 trillion use of the alternative fiscal scenario. Translation, current policy baseline. There are 18 Democrats still here in the Senate today who voted for that, for use of that baseline. And Mr. President, I would simply say that when it comes to extending tax relief, there's always a reluctance by my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. When it comes to new spending, they embrace that idea. We have a different view. We have different views of government. And the use of reconciliation, which is what this is about, the budget resolution opens the door to reconciliation, is in many respects a great example of the contrast in how we view this. The Democrats view reconciliation as a way to grow government, increase spending, new programs. The ARPA bill was about $2 trillion in spending. The IRA was about $1 trillion in spending. Both were used by the Democrats through a budget resolution and reconciliation to increase spending. Republicans, a lot of times, and we did in 2017, used it to reduce taxes and to reform the tax code, which was desperately needed. But as a consequence of that, as I said, we got not less revenue but more, $1.5 trillion more than was predicted at the time. And on the other side of the equation, when it comes to spending, the estimators, the so-called referees, tend to underestimate how much things are going to cost. Example, the so-called Inflation Reduction Act. But the bottom line in all this, Madam President, is that we need to address a lot of concerns in this country, many of which are dealt with in this budget resolution and ultimately the budget reconciliation bill.